Hello and welcome to No Boundaries. And today we're fortunate enough to have the guest, the man who lit up the World Cup 2015, Grant Elliott. Welcome along.
Yes, good to see you. Haven't seen you in a while. You look good in your blazer, and I'm ready for this discussion, for you to fire a few questions at me, I guess.
Well, I mean, probably a good place to start is the next World Cup, 2013, the 5th of October. New Zealand are going to take on England in a repeat of the 2019 World Cup, and they've just named their squad. The squad will come up for you to all have a look at. Grant, what are your thoughts initially when you saw the squad announced?
Yeah, I guess, you look at a squad, and for me, you play the conditions. I've always been quite a keen sort of person around who's going to perform in the conditions. And obviously, because you're going to India, there are going to be spin-friendly conditions as well as seamer-friendly on some occasions. So I think it's the balance of the squad, whether or not you can, you've got that ability to replace some players, some key players, if injuries did happen, and you'd know that more than most when you sort of plan the squad. I think Mark Chapman was a name that I looked at and I was like, I wasn't sure whether he was in or out. And probably Jimmy Neesham as well. The all-rounders, whether we were going to go in with the extra paces and extra batters or actually look to those all-rounders. Rachin Ravindra, another name. So those three were probably, they're your all-rounders. And it was always going to be fascinating to see how that played out, especially with Michael Bracewell, with the injury to him. I think with Michael Bracewell there, it gave us such a nice balance with someone who bowled off spin, who was excelling and in great form, but also gave that power. So, when you look at the spin of the New Zealand team, you got Mark Chapman, who could potentially offer a little bit of turn, but that's left arm orthodox. Rachin Ravindra, left arm orthodox. Mitch Satner, left arm orthodox, and then Ish Sodhi, the leg spin. So everything is going into the left-hander or away from the right-hander. It would be nice to have that off spin. Glenn Phillips obviously provides a little bit of probably part-time bowling compared to Michael Bracewell. And the other notable, I guess, selections was probably Kane Williamson, the Kano clock, whether or not he's going to make it. Obviously, you can change your selection, from what I understand, up until the 28th of September. So this gives him time to potentially be, there with a C next to his name as captain. The other one is Henry Nicholls. It's quite surprising. He's come back into the team during the England series and batted at 3. So potentially, if Kane isn't fit, then maybe Henry Nicholls can come in. What I do like about it, and it's very unfamiliar territory, I guess, for New Zealand, is that we've got some great right-hand, left-hand combinations. So in subcontinent conditions, when it can get particularly challenging against spin through the middle stages, you have that right-hand, left-hand combination. And going through the names, the likes of Conway, Latham, Neesham, Ravindra, Satner, there's a couple of left-handers. And probably the last big point of contention, and I think discussion point that's been top of everyone's mind, is the opening combination. So Conway and Young. I think obviously Guptill probably fell out of flavour. I don't know if he's going to be thought about for this, if there are any injuries. But Finn Allen was someone that was probably gunning for a position and might be a little bit disappointed at this stage. But what that does do is that we've got test players that are opening. And I think that you can potentially go in with a bowler heavy then with your squad. And I think that that's the one thing that will fascinate me the most in this competition, is the balance of the team. Do we go for the New Zealand crutch of going for all-rounders, or do we actually go in with that bowler heavy lineup and back, the top 5, top 6 batters to do the job?
Yeah, there's a number of good points raised there, Grant. I mean, for me, the bowling attack is the area where I think that will define how far we go in this World Cup. I think we saw enough from Trent Boult and Matt Henry the last couple of years with the new ball that they will take new ball wickets for us. For me, it's what happens next. And that's the bit that is a little bit of a concern. And it's probably gone back many years now, really, where the likes of Tim Southee is traditionally the other bowler you would consider. But obviously all 3 of those bowlers perform best with the new ball. One of them can't do that. So therefore, Lockie Ferguson needs to step up in that role as first change bowler. That ability in Indian conditions, you must take wickets through the middle, once the ball stops swinging. So once Trent and Matt Henry have done their job, can Lockie step up? Can he do that job to create some pressure through those middle overs? And I think the average of over 50 the last couple of years suggests that he's not in great touch. We know he's got pace. We know he's got some success in Indian conditions. For me, Lockie's going to be an absolute critical key in that attack. So therefore, Satner and Sodhi can come and bowl to the middle order, or batsmen who are actually just trying to start their innings. If not, it's going to be really tough to be able to contain through the middle. And we saw glimpses of that during that England series. So for me, Lockie Ferguson takes on a big role. And if Tim Southee is injured, that's the next part to discuss. If he is injured and out, what do they look to do then? Because we've just talked about the importance of that first change bowler. So what are your thoughts? If Tim's missing, and probably you've got a little bit of background with some thumb injuries as well, what are the chances you think of him being able to be available for maybe not the 5th of October, but not long after?
Yeah, I've broken my thumb. I had my thumb blown off the bottom hand to a Stuart Broad delivery at the Wanderers once, and had to get it operated on. It was pretty nasty, but I think the toughest thing with that, depending on the fracture, I had an operation, so depending on the fracture, it's quite difficult to then feel where you actually want to hold that ball to be able to get that seam upright. So hopefully Tim's fine, and it's not too bad, the fracture. But if it is, I think it might be a bit of a struggle to come back. But I think there's two names for me. It's Adam Milne. Do you go for pace or do you go for Kyle Jamieson? Jamieson, probably a little bit underdone going into England, coming back from injury. We know what he can do, not only with the ball, but he probably provides a little bit extra with the bat as well. Both Milne and him can bat. So, I think, depending on whether Milne goes to Bangladesh or not, he's got a slight hammy issue. That could be a bowl-off for the two of them in sort of conditions that might be sort of similar to India. But I do like the idea of a Ferguson-Milne as a captain, to be able to have those two players. And very rarely do they play together, to be fair. And that's what I was talking about earlier, is how do we structure this team? Do we play the extra spinner? Do we play the extra pacey to try and get wickets and back our batters? Or do we go to the crutch of the all-rounders, which I think we've always kind of done in New Zealand conditions? And that's where I think Pakistan are so strong, is they always go with the extra bowler and they back their bowlers, and they've got an outstanding bowling attack. So it will be fascinating to see who comes in for Southee. But I think that the depth of our bowlers, and with Bolt coming back into the fold, it really does give us that added, strike bowler, because Bolty takes wickets up front. He's like Shaheen Shah Afridi for Pakistan. A left armer that swings the ball back at 140 is just gold in any team. So for me, Bolt is huge. And like you said, Ferguson will have a massive part to play, but he's had experience in India. So you've got to back someone like that who's been to India a number of times and does have the skill set that, can either limit damage, but also get wickets.
Yeah, so then we flow into the batting side of things. You're right, Finn Allen was certainly given a number of opportunities, I guess, to push his case for that opening role. Yeah. And, Gary Stead has always talked about wanting that aggressive option to partner Conway. And then coming right towards the end and the England series, they obviously decided that either Finn hasn't done enough or they really liked the way that Will Young was operating. So that opening partnership of Young and Conway, do they have that ability to be able to go up and down through the gears and be able to have a tempo that gets New Zealand ahead of the game when either setting a target or chasing over 300, which I think is going to be highly likely in this series?
Yeah, I think, if you get true conditions, you get really true, fantastic batting conditions, then I think New Zealand, somehow they're going to have to up the ante. And you start looking at players like Mitchell and Phillips, perhaps Neesham that can come in a little bit later, even someone like Chapman, if he was to be selected, that can up the ante. It's always been a little bit of a worry for me, is when you get those scores over 300, how are we going to fare? Because you start looking at players like Conway and you go, well, he's going to have to score a big 100. Or Will Young, you need one player to score that big 100 and then cameos around them. Other players possess a lot more power than we do, I'd say. So if it is a true surface, we have to identify that quickly. But yeah, we're going for a test batting lineup. You look at Conway, young test players. Then if Williamson comes in at 3, you've got a test player there, and Daryl Mitchell at 4, and then Tom Latham at 5. So there's all, they're all test players, which gives you a solid batting lineup. And I think that the test would be that aggression. How far can we push it? We saw South Africa score in excess of 400 against Australia. If that happened against New Zealand, do we have the power and capabilities to actually go out there and score those runs? But I think with the extra bowler, if we do play that extra bowler, be it a seamer or spinner, perhaps we don't have to chase as much if we're chasing. It gives you that balance. So it is a change of guard, I think, for Gary Stead. And it's one that you have to nail your badge to the wall, because it is a totally different tact. I quite like the yin and the yang. I like left-handers, right-handers, and I like attacking players and 360 players to be at the crease. So if you can get that balance and you've got those tools, fantastic. But maybe it's also mitigating that risk of Kane Williamson not being there potentially.
Yeah, it's sort of going against, I guess, a lot of the top sides in the world at the moment. If you think of England, you obviously think of the way they operate at the top of the order, even throughout the order. You think of the way Australia have gone with Warner, Head, Marsh sort of being in the top 3. So they've left Labuschagne out completely. So you're looking at those sides and going, India's another one. Obviously with Shubman Gill, with Ishan Kishan coming in, they've certainly gone, hey, we know that the game's moved on. Potentially we're going to have to score 350 even on some of these grounds. Ahmedabad's one of those where you could need more if it's on that red soil. So, but I go back to what Gary Stead said. He said, we want to play our way, and Tom Latham said it pretty much throughout that whole series as well. He's like, we've got to find our own style, and I think our style is probably to try and defend to 270, 280, and then chase it down with that template that suits our batting lineup, rather than getting into a bash smash sort of a approach, which potentially we just don't have the resource to do that. So yeah, it'll be really interesting. I guess thinking about the World Cup and the fact it's only a couple of weeks away, where do you think we're actually positioned? Do you think that Bangladesh, that tour, is actually going to still solve some questions for us, or do you think it's pretty much settled now?
I think it has to be settled now. It's only 1 or 2 players, and you'd be best placed to probably make that analysis in terms of team selection and how far out you actually have it nailed down. I would have liked to have thought that before the England series they had it nailed down. It's just maybe 1 or 2 players, and then it's cover for injury. You've already had that planning, and that's where I think teams that get the jump on oppositions in a world tournament are the ones that have their lineup sorted months before. They know exactly who's going to be playing. They know their top 11. They know that first team that is going to take to the field in the first game. And consistency in squad and consistency in opportunities and roles prior to the world tournament is what gives you that consistency and that confidence to go into a tournament and do well. So I'd be very surprised if they don't know it. Obviously, there's injury cover now. And there's been a few hurdles for New Zealand on the way there, Williamson and probably Bracewell being 2 of the most notable. And now you've got a senior player in Tim Southee with an injury cloud. So that preparation that you have to have and the brackets of names that for players that can replace other players is so important as a coach to be able to forecast and be adaptable. I think Bangladesh, it's maybe, there's a couple of names there that you think, maybe Milne and Jameson. Finn Allen's got another opportunity to potentially push his name forward, but also Henry Nicholls. So I'd watch out for Henry Nicholls to see what happens there, because depending on what happens with Kane Williamson, he could just slot into that number 3. Obviously, a player that scored 50 in the 2019 World Cup has been, thrown around that batting order so often that now he's probably a versatile enough player and experienced enough player. And once again, a test player that could come in and actually do a job.
Yeah, I think contingencies, I guess, as a coach preparing a squad, I think that, as I said, you've probably got your number 11 or your first 11 down pat now, and you should, certainly this close to the World Cup. For me, they've picked Mark Chapman as the backup batter. And therefore, if any of the top 5 go down, he's got to be able to step up and do that job. So I know you've talked about Henry Nicholls potentially being a straight swap for Kane. I'm assuming Kane's going to be there regardless, and I think it's really important that he is. So for me, rather than having to shuffle everybody around, Chapman's got to jump into a couple of different slots, and we know that he can probably do the job towards the back end if maybe Mitchell or Phillips are out. Might have to drop into that sort of 4, 5, 6 slot. But for me, he has to have a crack in the top 3, because if you head into the World Cup and day before you have an issue with Young, you get sickness with Conway, you've got to have somebody that jumps in there, and you don't want to have to muck around your whole order. Potentially Rachin, Ravindra could do that same role. He's probably more a top 3 batter, and maybe he has to perform that role at some stage during that series as well. So yeah, for me, it's just that fine tuning and making sure that on the spot you've got those contingencies, rather than as I said, be still tinkering with your top 11, and get some more bowling into Phillips, because I take your point. I think it's critical, the fact that you've got the ball spinning away from the right-handers, from the left-handers, and otherwise sides will just come at us, and they'll take down Satner, they'll take down Ravindra. With that matchup heading to the onside. So important that he gets some bowling. And I think if he does that, then hopefully the Black Caps will arrive with a bit of confidence.
Yeah, one thing on that as well, Hess, is I think, Cole McConkey is another one, and Dean Foxcroft to be watching in that Bangladesh series. I was surprised that Foxcroft wasn't picked in the England series, because I thought there's an opportunity, watching him domestically. He did well with the ball, surprisingly well with the ball. And obviously with the bat, he possesses power, but he times the run quite well. Good chaser. So anyone that can bowl off spin and bat a bit, I think, is someone to watch that could be a potential swap in the current squad.
Yeah, no, spot on. I think you'd be a little bit disappointed with the volume of runs he got in that New Zealand A series. I think it was a really important series for him against Australia A to push his case, because you're right, that skill mix he's got is exactly what they need, really, as a backup player, where you could slot in where or if required. So nice option there. Now we've also seen a couple of pretty important series. Obviously the Asia Cup's been taking place. India have just beaten Sri Lanka in the final and blown them away. But the one I want to talk about is Australia, South Africa. Obviously Australia won the first 2 ODIs pretty convincingly, and then got pretty much blown off the park by South Africa in those last game, and some really, really high-scoring affairs. Do you think we're likely to see something similar in India come the World Cup?
Jeez, I mean, those Indian conditions, honestly, the first time I ever commentated was last year, and we went to Indore, and I watched the first delivery. It was a decent delivery, sort of on maybe 3/4 of the way up off stump. And Rohit Sharma just leant on it and just rolled his wrists over it. And I thought, that'll be 1. And the ball just gathered pace. And I think I looked at the score, and they were maybe close on 150 after 13 overs, something ridiculous. And the batting conditions were just so friendly. And you're thinking, what is the forecast score? I think it came up on the little ticker on the TV next to us. And I was like, I think it went up to close to 500 or something. And you're thinking, gee, I hope they don't get that. But as a bowler, I mean, we had an inexperienced bowling attack, but some of those conditions can be so batter friendly. And I think when they are, it's the team that adapts quickly. They get the message out. They know, they understand, they've got the experience of those conditions in India. And they don't bat within themselves. And I think we were very good in, when we played together with you as coach, is getting messages back to the dugout. What do we think is a good score? There were some people that could judge it a lot better than others. Some almost undershot the totals. But to be able to get an accurate reading, and as a player to identify, hey, ball's not swinging, there's no seam, not a lot of spin, we can really dominate today, and it might get tougher later on tonight or later on in the day. So identifying those conditions, but also the ability to adapt when it's not a high-scoring game. Because if you go too hard early on, you can lose quick wickets, and that can really set you back. So experience is key, and I always say it in world tournaments, be it rugby, cricket, whatever, football, comes down to the senior players. senior players, support staff, they drive the team. They drive, the methodology behind trying to get totals, and that's where the key will lie for the Black Caps, is in their senior players, whether they can stand up. And you look at the previous England series, there's only 200s that were scored. So Conway and Mitchell, but someone like South Africa, if they come in and they've got that power, we have to identify that quickly and be able to go really hard from the start. And you've already alluded to the fact of Young and Conway. Can they actually go out and identify that quickly to go hard from the start so they can get that total of over 300?
Yeah, and one player around the world that's been doing that really well the last 12 months is Travis Head. He's obviously come out. He's been really aggressive in terms of the way he's taken on the power play. He's almost made David Warner look a little bit snail-like in terms of the way he's approached things. But now he's broken his hand. Do you think that's a big loss for Australia, or do you think they've probably got enough depth to cover that? And how would they cover that?
Oh, they've definitely got enough depth, Australia. I mean, take your pick. It always surprises me in world tournaments, the players that come in, but I think they've got the confidence as well. Like Mitch Marsh has done it on a number of occasions where he hasn't been playing. He comes in. We saw it in the Test series in the Ashes, where they just come in and they've got that confidence. They've got that skill level and probably experience as well. India have played a lot in India, and that counts for a lot. New Zealand's performance in India is subpar in terms of our results against India in India. So it's the experience. And I mean, it took me probably 2-3 tours to India to try and, get my head around it and the conditions. But as you know, I'm a little bit of a slower learner than others, Hess. But Australia, once again, injuries, how they cover for it, I think it's a Michael Bracewell injury, unfortunately. It's a multifaceted player. He's good in the field. He's experienced. He bowls off spin, but he's also a left-handed attacking player. So can you replace him? You can't really replace him like for like. It's almost like if Trent Bolt gets injured, they go, oh, how are we going to replace it? Well, you can't. You can't replace a Trent Bolt, but you can find a replacement that might be able to do a job. And then it's about trying to make that team a little bit malleable than maybe you thought as a coach.
Yeah, I think they're probably lucky. I mean, Glenn Maxwell will slot in sort of in the middle now, I guess, and they'll move either Green or Mitch Marsh probably up to the top to continue that aggressive sort of a route, you would think. And then Steve Smith will drop in. But they've probably got less concerns than we do with our probably 3 pretty significant injuries. South Africa obviously came back from 2-0 down, won the last 3, scored truckloads of runs, and that top 6 looks powerful. And from a seam bowling point of view, they look good. I mean, if Nokia's fit, then great. They've got a Rabada, Nokia, Marco Jansen. They're pretty damn strong. Do you think they're a serious contender? I don't know if they're being talked about as much as potentially they have in the past. Do you think they're a serious contender this World Cup?
You know what? Maybe it's a good thing that they're not going to be spoken about as much, because a month ago you would have said South Africa no chance. You wouldn't have thought that they would have put together the performances they have against Australia. And like you say, it's starting to look good for them. They're starting to find their combinations. However, have those combinations played together enough? All of those roles that they've had, have they had enough game time? Do they have the players that have played in India? Well, the answer to all of that is probably yes. So I think that they would come in as a contender now. And you know better than anyone, Hess, you make it to the semi-finals, it's anyone's game. And you have to make that top 4. That's all you have to do. Get into that top 4. And then, it's individual performances like we saw Heinrich Klaasen do. I mean, what an unbelievable innings that was. It was 174 off 83 balls. I mean, no one would have called that. I'm sure, anyone that was at the TAB that day would never have been able to call 13 maximums in an innings. He probably wouldn't have called it himself. It's one of those innings that now you go, wow, okay, these guys really do possess a lot of power. And we come back to that, statement of, can New Zealand possess that same sort of power? We're looking at some powerful lineups against New Zealand. So we're going to have to combat that with our bowling and then just precise batting. And we do have a precise batting lineup. But South Africa looking strong, and I think for the first time in many World Cups, very much under the radar and under talked about team.
So let's lead on to that before we talk about 2015. Do you think New Zealand have a chance of making the semis? If so, great. If not, that's fine. But give us your top 4 contenders for this World Cup. Who's going to make the semi-finals? It's a round robin affair, so there's nothing to do with draws or pools or anything like that. True round robin. Who are the 4 form teams for you?
Do you want just 4 teams, or can I give you 3 and then bracket a couple?
No. You got to make a call here, Grant.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go with India, Aussie, and Pakistan. First 3. And then I'm going to bracket. No, I'm not going to bracket.
You're not very good at following instructions, are you, Grant? Carry on.
Obviously, England, New Zealand, and South Africa. I mean, I probably have to go with informed team England, but New Zealand do so well at world tournaments. Just very rarely miss out on a semi-final. So I'm going to go with my heart and just go New Zealand. So there you go: India, Aussie, Pakistan, and New Zealand.
Okay, I'll go slightly different, but I won't actually have Pakistan in there. I think they're still chopping and changing a little bit with their top order. We know they've got some outstanding bowlers, but England, Australia, England, and I'm going to go South Africa. The smoky for me would be Sri Lanka with that varied bowling attack they've got in those conditions, and they're playing some games on some wickets that could be friendly for that spin bowling attack. I love New Zealand. I'd love them to continue doing what they're doing. I just think it's going to be a little bit tough. Obviously still be supporting them, but I think it's going to be tough to get past those 4 sides to make the top 4. If they do, they're going to have to play some good cricket and probably going to have to score 300 plus on at least 2 or 3 occasions. So if they do, they certainly deserve to be there. So let's head into 2015 World Cup, Grant. I'll start it because I was part of actually selecting you for the World Cup. Many people didn't, obviously. You were sort of hibernating, playing for the Firebirds at the time in domestic cricket, and probably a few months out, we'd identified that. You talked before about power in the middle stages or the back end of an innings. We talk about that calmness as well, and certainly one of the things that was really important in us selecting you for that role at 5 was that you were multi-skilled, so you could bowl some overs and give us that 6th bowler who also provided a real difference. So you were a completely different type of bowler than everybody else we had. Obviously, good changes of pace, could bowl wicket to wicket, could bowl with the keeper up. All of those things were useful. But it was more that calmness under pressure, the ability for you to read the game and know what score we needed. So the ability to bring that experience, that calmness, and be able to change your tempo up and down, and depending on what the game required. So those were attributes that we really loved, and we hoped that you'd come in and be able to do that. And certainly history suggests you did that and more. So if you think about, when you first got picked to come back into the BLACKCAPS, having been out of the side for a little while, what were your thoughts? Do you feel like you were ready? Were you just waiting for the phone call? How did it pan out for you?
Well, I think like 6 months prior to that, so obviously a lot changed 6 months out, because 6 months out, Bruce Edgar, selector, I had a chat with him and he sort of said, you're going to be a replacement player. And I was like, that's fine. I understand. I'm, mid-30s, but if you need me, I'll be available. If there's an injury, I'll be ready, But we were discussing going on an A tour to Dubai. And I just said, well, what's the point, Bootsy? Like, you know what I can do? Let me just enjoy my last season playing for the Firebirds. And that's where I was in the wilderness. But actually, that probably proved to be the best decision ever, because I played great T20 cricket. I was enjoying my cricket and actually did exceptionally well with bat and ball. But it was all televised. So it was probably better documented than me playing against Scotland in the UAE. So obviously your thoughts changed prior to the World Cup with me as a player. And I guess, it was always a dream. When I was 13, 12, watching the first ever World Cup, the 92 World Cup in New Zealand, Australia, as well. Watching, Deepak Patel open the bowling, and Martin Crowe and Alan Donald opening for South Africa. I was supporting South Africa then, and had aspirations of playing for South Africa in a World Cup. That's where the dream was sort of born. I always wanted to play in a World Cup, so it was a dream come true. I think I was very lucky that we played 5 games. I only played 3 of those, I think, against Sri Lanka, and found some form in those games. So those warm-up games prior to the World Cup probably gave me a little bit more of a foot up, because I had been in the wilderness for a while from international cricket. Bowling was never really an issue, because I never really had to put 10 overs together. It was always sort of 5-6 overs max. But it was more the batting, getting used to the pace and getting used to the pressures of playing international cricket again. But I was at an age, and we talk about experience. I think, that's where I realized it's so important under pressure to have players that are experienced and have the experience to produce match-winning performances under pressure. So, irrespective of where you are in your journey skills-wise, I think the ability to absorb pressure and put pressure back on opposition in world tournaments is a real skill, and you have to be in a space in your career where you've got the ability to do that. And I think in that World Cup, we always had the confidence that someone would produce something special when the chips were down, and that's what happened. Everyone actually contributed. Every batter contributed in that tournament, and every bowler did. So it was a real team effort. It's not about individuals. It's about that team and that collective. And I think the balance of our team was so exceptional. The way that Baz at the start of the innings just was so ultra aggressive with Martin Guptill, got us ahead of the game all the time, so that the middle order could take their time and just sort of death by paper cuts, which was kind of my role, I guess, before I was allowed to launch. Craig McMillan said I was never allowed to hit the ball in the air until the 45th over. So, that was always my role. But we had a great balance, and the teams that can find that balance and find your role within the team to chase down any total, I think is key in those world tournaments.
Yeah, so just before we talk about the semi-final, I think about that innings in Dunedin where we were 5 for 70, and yourself and Luke Ronke came together, and I think Luke got 170, you got 100. So it was certainly that absorbing pressure, and then it was a matter of just constantly hitting the ball in the stands, and that certainly gave the rest of the batting group a whole heap of confidence that, hey, even if we got ourselves in trouble, we still had these guys coming down the bottom order who could do anything. Do you remember that day?
Yeah, that was probably a turning point in terms of prior to the World Cup. It was a score that I needed because I hadn't played a lot of international cricket. So to get that score gave me a lot of confidence, probably gave me confidence as well selection-wise that I was going to be, the man to bat at 5 and do the job, and confidence of those people around you. And you mentioned Luke's innings. I mean, that was exceptional that day. I just stood at the non-strikers end and I think got a runnable 100 while I watched Bronx just hit it to all corners. But the confidence of your teammates to know that whatever position, as you said, that you're in, you can get out of, is quite a unique place to be in as a team. I think it lowers the anxiety level, raises the confidence level, and that's probably why we were so consistent in terms of our approach to games. But, confidence going into these tournaments is just, like you look at South Africa, and I think that's probably what we're talking about with South Africa. They'll be going in with some confidence now, of players that have sort of veiled what they're capable of, which gives everyone around them that confidence.
So we arrived at the semi-final 2015 with plenty of confidence. We won every game leading up to it. We were probably one of the form teams heading into that. We got a home semi-final against South Africa. We'll talk about the end in a moment, but what do you remember about that day? How do you remember about how the game unfolded? What are some of the key memories for you?
I think the first thing is I've always approached knockout cricket as, you're never going to get this opportunity again. What a great opportunity. And that almost sort of unshackles you, because it's not a series. You're not playing a 5-game series. You don't get a second chance. This is it. You get one chance. So going into that game, I was thinking, this is amazing. Playing against South Africa, country of birth, in a semi-final, full house, Eden Park. And I think if you can't get up for a moment like that as a sportsman or woman, then I think you're probably in the wrong industry, because that's what a great occasion. I do remember the game. I remember South Africa just being on top. They were all over us. It was probably the first time in the tournament where I thought we're in trouble here at the end of the innings, and that was because normally we'd bowl out Bolt and Southey quite early, and Brendan was aggressive doing that. They'd get wickets. But this was a particular time where AB was going and David Miller just got, 50 of 20 balls at the end. But the game was shortened, so the rain was massive. I don't know who did the rain dance that day, but it was a welcome rain dance, I think, because I was maybe looking down the barrel of bowling 3 of those overs towards the end after Corey had just been hit for 20, I think. And when the rain came down. So the rain was a significant sort of memory where I thought, okay, it's a reprieve. And then when we went into bat, it was, every time it was just Brendan's innings. It was, he would just get us ahead of the run rate. And, he was smoking it to all corners, and pity he couldn't go on, because he probably could have finished that game in about, 35 overs. But then, it's the pressure, and the crowd was noticeable. The crowd, how it just went through this roller coaster of emotions. You could tell when the game was tense. You could tell when we were ahead of the game. And I think I always felt that we were in control of the run rate at Eden Park, because you just can't let it get to 12s at Eden Park. Most grounds you probably don't want it to get to 10s, but Eden Park you don't want it to get to 12s. And I think we were always in control of that, one boundary and over and a few singles around it. But it was, it was the wickets, and, having a partnership with Ross, having a partnership with Corey, those were significant partnerships leading to, the latter stages of the game. And Kepler Wessels always said to me at the start of my career, he said, the team that cracks first under pressure is the team that loses the game. And that was always something that sort of stood with me throughout my career, is like, try and not, let the pressure get to you. Just think clearly, keep going. And they always say bat long. And that's what we did. We batted long and got ourselves into a position where we needed 12s off the last over. So it was anyone's game.
So let's fast forward. We all remember 5 off 2. You're batting with Dan Vittoria. I think you've just run it by, so you got yourself back on strike. 5 off 2. Obviously, we were sitting up in the stand, whether it be on the sideline or in the stand, having our thoughts about, obviously we only needed 4, we felt, and whether you're going to ramp it over the keeper or whatever you're going to do, facing Dale Steyn. What was going through your head? Were you calm? Did you have a whole heap of different thoughts going through your head? Talk us through it.
Hell no. I wasn't calm. There was a moment there when Steyn was at the top of his mark, and that's where your cricketing tools take over, your mental preparation and your routines and that. But prior to that, because I think he cramped for a while, and it delayed things even more. So there's a number of thoughts that go through your head. You have fear of failure. That goes through your head, and you have to stop that thinking pretty quickly. And my response to everything has always been, when you have your flight, fight, or freeze response, is to fight. And there's no other option. You're boxed into a corner, and you have to try and change the narrative and go, what a great opportunity this is. I don't think that went through my head. All I thought about was like, I've got to do this. I don't want to be the guy that walks into a bar and everyone goes, that's the guy that, he botched the semi-final for us. And I think there'd be one person that was probably more nervous than I was, and that was the guy that was coming in next, which was probably Tim Southey. But what I did think about, and I know that guys say I was very aloof in the team, and I did realize that if we hit a boundary, if we hit 4, that we would have tied, and because we were ahead of the pool, we would have gone through anyway. So I knew that. So I knew that, we've got 2 cracks here, 2 cracks at a boundary. I've got to try now. If I don't do it, then, someone else can come in and do the job. They brought mid off, mid on up. So that indicated that it was probably going to be 1 or 2 options. It's either going to be short back of a length, or it was the double bluff, because Eden Park's small, bring those two up, and then actually go for the Yorker, which should be the delivery that they went for. Speaking to a couple of the South African players, they went for back of a length. That was what they wanted to do. And at Eden Park, I mean, they can fly to all corners. So back of a length, and I just closed my eyes and swung, didn't I, Hess? And managed to hit it slightly.
I can't even remember it.
I hit it slightly high on the bat, but it was a memorable moment. But memorable that I think we had the nation behind us. Eden Park. I mean, Eden Park has so many special memories. National Stadium. You can count the amount of memories it's had in different sporting codes, and that certainly would be one of them for a lot of people. Going to the first World Cup final is a special moment, and Dan Vittori still abuses me about not hugging him first. I should have hugged him first before I celebrated. So I apologize to Dan if he is watching this, but I did hug him eventually. And I mean, the elation that we had as a team and the journey that we had as a team, I mean, it's special to be a middle order player, but also feel like you've done your job. As a middle order player, you always want to be not out at the end winning the game. And you don't always, curate it in that way. You don't write your story in that way a lot of the time in cricket and as a middle order player, but it happened that day. And it was a team effort. There was so many team performances that went into me being there at the end, and a lot of calamity as well around it. I mean, I think South Africa could have got me out 3 or 4 times leading up to that final delivery. So fortuitous along with the rain.
Yeah, look, it was an amazing game, and certainly was towards the end of riding a wave, as you said, of the fact New Zealand public got behind us. It was an amazing time to be part of the BLACKCAPS, an amazing ride that we had, right through to the final. So, but from a personal point of view, how did it change your life? Because those moments, you got the name the Hairy Jav, that's probably stuck even right through to now. You've become a bit of an icon. I'm sure if you walked into a pub these days, most people would know who you are. You made a real name for yourself, and rightfully so. So how has that moment, do you think, changed your life?
I think the only way it's... Well, yeah, I do get called the hairy javelin, which is fine. I embrace that. But I think the way that it's changed my life is I think a lot of people finish their cricket careers with regret and maybe even a little bit of resentment and, I should have been selected for this or I should have done that. And I look back fondly now with my career, whereas had that moment not happened, maybe I wouldn't have looked back at my career as fondly. I would have felt that maybe I hadn't achieved as much as I wanted to achieve. I think like my last, because I ended up playing for another maybe year and a bit after that for New Zealand, and I felt comfortable and I felt comfortable in my own skin and felt, that I was going to be, one of the first names sort of picked in a team sheet. I was never really chasing that position in the team, which felt like I was doing that most of my career. So I think, it gave me the confidence to have closure in my career when I, eventually retired and when, I'm happy with my career and I'm really glad and grateful that cricket's given me so much. And, it's a game of failure. It is. It's a tough game to finish your career and be grateful for what it's given you. But I am. The memories are amazing. And playing international cricket, going into a World Cup, I think it's so necessary for cricketers to be able to feel that patriotism and that connection with the country that they're playing for and the community and whānau that you have in New Zealand. And I think that, there's a lot of, franchise cricket happening around the world, but international cricket is unmatched in terms of the feelings and emotions that you have when you play international cricket.
Well, Grant, I've certainly enjoyed, working with you over the years. We've enjoyed some pretty great times together, and they'll certainly live in the memory for a long time. But I really thank you for joining us today on No Boundaries. Obviously, we're getting closer to a new World Cup in a couple of weeks' time. The 5th of October is a date that we'll all pencil in, and certainly look forward to watching that match on Sky. But I thank you for joining us today, and yeah, hopefully we've got some other memories to relive in the years to come.
Thanks, Hess. Always enjoyable, and yeah, looking forward to seeing how we fare in the World Cup. I think it's going to be fascinating to see how well we do. We always rise to the occasion, but I've really enjoyed it. Good to see you again, mate.
Thanks, Grant. Appreciate it. And to the viewers at home, look forward to seeing you next time on No Boundaries.